Friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
Welcome to the third volume of Wrestling What Ifs. I love looking at pretty much anything in life and being like, hey, what if?
What if? What if I had oatmeal this morning instead of waffles?
Right.
Nothing would be different.
Probably nothing would be different, honestly. Nothing would be different.
But you never know. There could have been a butterfly effect that happened throughout the day that led to a different outcome today.
We could be millionaires. That's kind of what I always go to.
That's a bit
buddy.
of a stretch there, buddy.
So you guys left a bunch of great wrestling what ifs in the comments from the last video. So in the comments to this one, I want you guys to put your best wrestling what ifs so we can talk about those in the next video. I like this one here. We're starting off hot. Money Mike Productions. This guy wrote a whole novel, Larson. He said if Gagne had put the AWA title on Hogan doesn't leave for WWF. Who knows if WrestleMania is a thing without Vince having Hogan lead the way? Who does Vince make the face of WWF in the 80s without Hogan?
Well, just because Vern puts the title on Hogan is not a guarantee that Hogan doesn't leave anyways.
So Vince had just seemingly, because I was reading the book Death of the Territories.
Yeah.
And Vince seemingly just had endless funds. You know, he bought WWF from his dad for $1 million.
Pennies on the dollar of what it was worth.
He was going around, if you see this book, he's going around territory to territory, just cutting these huge checks. Not physically, not the big giant.
Not the Publishers Clearinghouse ones, no.
They weren't big gimmick checks. They were like just large
normal
amounts.
size checks with a lot of money written on
a lot of zeros on them. And I kind of feel like at the end of the day, but let's say Hulk Hogan, because if you look at Hulk Hogan, like pre whatever he found to make himself so big.
Yeah.
Like he was kind of a smaller dude. What if he just didn't? What if he wasn't around? What if he was like, oh, I like working this strong style in New Japan?
Like I joined a band as a bass player.
Right? Yeah, he joined Metallica.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you got that tryout for Metallica.
I still feel like Vince McMahon's overall Thanos-esque scheme would have worked.
Yeah,
but Hogan helped a lot. Who would have been the guy? You know what would have been really interesting? I don't think this ever would have worked. But, like, I wonder if he ever could have convinced Mr. T to be a full-time WWF guy. If he threw, like, just gobs, like A-Team times 2, you know?
Times money, yeah.
Like, Mr. T could have been the face of WWF.
Maybe.
It never would have been Mr. Wonderful. Like, Orndorff didn't have it.
No, the only person I could think of that was on the roster around that time that had that level of charisma was Macho Man.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, there was always an element of danger with Macho Man in terms of his character, in terms of presentation. That I don't know if he's the baby face that Vince would have built the company around.
Do you think the only other guy I can think of at that time that had that level of charisma, but he was a bad guy, so he would have had to have been a baby face, and that's Piper.
Yeah.
I think Piper's the other guy who probably could have been the A guy.
What about Magnum TA if Vince had brought Magnum TA over? I don't know if that timeline works.
You know, Magnum TA, he didn't have the let me tell you something thing.
No, he didn't. He was much more soft-spoken.
He was chill.
Yeah, he was chill.
He was chill Magnum. So, I don't know. I kind of feel like it could have been Piper or Vince McMahon would have gotten Mr. T. Come on, God damn it.
Or instead of focusing so much of what WWF was at the time around Hogan, make it more of a team effort, you know? You know,
that's a possibility.
not just strictly what you going to do, brother.
What about this one? I like this one. Again, this is from the same guy. This is from Money Mike Productions.
All right.
Steve Austin signed a 2-year extension with WCW in 1994 through 1996. If Bischoff doesn't fire him in 95 and he's there until his contract is up, what happens? Doesn't go to ECW, cuts those promos, no King of the Ring, no 316.
What?
Would Steve like that? That is a big one. I think the biggest thing with Steve Austin is if he doesn't have that cup of tea and comes up with Stone Cold.
What happens is Stone Cold is the 11th member of the NWO and gets lost in the shuffle.
Oh my God. Oh shit. Yeah.
That's what happens.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't know about Austin. Well, here's the thing though. WWF still had The Rock.
Yeah.
They still had Mankind, Undertaker, Triple H, Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
They had a lot of people there. But here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. Bret Hart really likes Stone Cold Steve, or he really likes Steve Austin.
Yeah.
I think if he still ended up in WCW, maybe Bret Hart would have elevated Steve Austin. Maybe we would have gotten that the WrestleMania match, but in WCW.
Could have been.
Like 2 years later.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Stone Cold or Steve Austin as 11th member of NWO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Patrick Cheeseman says, what if Finn never got injured against Seth? I think we've talked about this one. I think it's kind of well known.
Talked about that. He was going to have that title until he lost it to Brock. I think that
Brock
was
going to take it off.
That was the plan.
Probably at
the Rumble or something like that.
Yeah, probably not long after he won it.
Yeah, probably not long after he won it. Let's see here.
Oh, here we go. DJ Mott. What if CM Punk had gotten his WrestleMania main event? What if Vince gave him everything he wanted? He was like, I want the WrestleMania main event. I want to beat, I don't know, who did Daniel Bryan beat all of Evolution at WrestleMania 30?
Yeah.
So what if it was CM Punk versus Evolution in the main event of WrestleMania 30 and he wins and he's got both those titles?
Yeah.
Is that enough?
I mean, that might have. It's the Drew McIntyre story, kind of, because if CM Punk at that point being beat up and worn out and exhausted, walks out of WrestleMania 30, at least holding those titles, thinking, well, at least it's all worth it now. Mm-hmm. But that had been enough to keep him from walking out, and then eventually getting fired. I don't know. There is a lot of things that he took issue with, not just not main eventing WrestleMania. If you listen to the Art of Wrestling podcast, there was his health, there was how WWE approached his health, not just the infection he had, but like knee injuries where Vince was having to come back way too early. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if he might have, if he ended WrestleMania 30 holding those belts, he'd be like, all right, well, at least I got something out of put my body through all this for the last few years. But would have been enough for him to not eventually leave? I don't know, because the body, even if you have the validation, at a certain point the body's gonna say, well, validation doesn't mean much to me. I'm not doing this anymore.
So here's my speculation on that. Even though I've got Punk back here, we've got Phil right here.
Yeah,
I think he always would have known that Vince never saw him, and Punk and Triple H never saw him as The Rock, as Stone Cold, as John Cena.
Yeah.
And even if he would have finished WrestleMania the way Daniel Bryan did, Daniel Bryan was never seen of as The Rock, as Stone Cold, as Cena. And he would have been the exact same way. And even if he would have gotten the WrestleMania stuff, he would have figured out a reason to be upset. And he still would have left somehow, some way. He would have been like, no, screw this. This place doesn't see me. Even though he's the biggest fan of Bret Hart, he should know he was the Bret Hart.
He was.
Because Bret Hart was never Hogan.
No.
And at every opportunity, Vince McMahon, if given it, WrestleMania 9, put Hulk Hogan right there.
Has added value for the European tour, though, Steve.
And now, now that he comes back with the biggest this, the biggest that, they're kind of seeing him as The Rock, as the Hogan.
Now he's in the position where he's the legend making his return.
Yeah.
It's the part-time deal and all that.
I think his story would have played out pretty similar.
Yeah, I think it might have as well. Beans here says, what if Brock Lesnar never returned from UFC? Now, what if in 2012 he never came back to WWE?
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, we had talked about before the idea that TNA wanted Brock Lesnar. So that would have been something, but I think he probably still would have had him come back to WWE. If he had never come back, oh man, I don't know. Like, I mean, okay, who would have beat The Undertaker? Probably Roman. Mm-hmm. Probably Roman. We probably would have been there because his streak probably would have continued until I could see that streak going all the way until 33 when we were there.
Well, it could have been Roman, or they could have had Bray Wyatt beat him at 31 if he hadn't already lost at 30. If they really wanted to try to, really push Bray Wyatt at that point.
Yeah, maybe. It could have been Bray's deal. So that's a possibility. I mean, who would have Roman's forever feud been with? Because that 5 years was squarely Roman Brock.
Yeah.
Roman Brock.
It would make a lot of Seth for it to be Roman Seth.
Could have been Roman Taker. He could have tried to use Taker in that Brock role is like, okay,
could be.
this is the guy. But then Brock had that. I don't know if Taker would have had that title for as long as Brock did.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. That is a good one. Captain Oregon NWO Forever says, this is interesting. Says, what if WWECW didn't lose all its main stars within a year of starting up? So this is interesting. He says they lost the title run that was supposed to carry the early days with RVD. They lost Kurt Angle. They lost Benoit. They lost Big Show. And by the time they lost Lashley, the whole thing was obviously a zombie show that had no chance to ever build up momentum beyond being a replacement for Heat and Velocity.
It never really captured the philosophy of the original ECW, though.
So my original hot take, I don't know, you probably didn't see it. My original hot take in this thread was ECW was never built for longevity. It never would have worked.
No.
And I kind of feel like WWECW, probably the same.
Yeah.
Probably the same. I just don't know, like, did they really give it the amount of resources and time and attention and devotion that it would have needed to be the proper third brand?
You know, they could have rode on nostalgia for a bit if they had kind of marketed it as an extension of the original ECW. Obviously, they're not going to go as hardcore into the wrestling, but rather than just having it take place in the same arenas as Raw and SmackDown, book it separate venues, smaller venues, you know, capture the atmosphere of those as best they could of those old ECW shows.
Yeah, I mean, they eventually ECW was replaced by NXT.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just don't know if that philosophy would have changed if they would have, you know, kept ECW, used it as a developmental brand, but still had main roster stars, kind of like how they do now to bolster it. I think that's a possibility. I just really appreciate that. Yeah, they did. When you look at it through this lens, they did lose a lot.
They did.
Yeah.
They did. Cruz here asks, what if Lex Luger won the title at WrestleMania 10? What if it wasn't Brett? What if it was Lex?
So Brett got it at 10, and then he ended up losing it to Backlund, right?
Yes, and who then dropped it like 2 days later to Diesel, and Diesel had it for a year.
Yeah.
Basically.
If it was Luger, oh man, that's sort of hard to wrap my head around. Let's see. So he wins it at 10.
So that'd been 1994, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think that probably Vince. Here's what I think would have happened. So Vince didn't like that Luger complained about being on the bus too much, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, he's not the guy. But if he actually pulled the trigger on it, was like, okay, we're gonna have Luger be the guy. I think in the end, Vince's gut would have still told him, he's not the guy, because I don't think that Luger would have been like a big difference maker. And instead of Backlund beating him, because at least Backlund had like he had a story with Brett, like with the wrestling and stuff.
Yeah.
Luger probably just would have eaten a loss to Nash,
Diesel.
to Diesel.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like that's how it would have played out. That's my guess.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, MW Chester says, what if the Clique became a storyline faction? Oh, he does a bunch of them. What if the Clique became a storyline faction? That would have been sort of equal parts the laziest and probably most entertaining faction there is. Because remember, like, Nash was most entertaining when he just didn't give a shit?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like it would have been, like, always sort of being out of pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Probably would have, especially if Scott... Man, could you imagine if Scott Hall, Nash, HBK...
And Waltman.
And Waltman were all and Triple H were all the actual, like, that's the faction.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Nobody ever would have beat any of them.
Well, I mean, every episode of Raw would be like 45 minutes of the Clique, and then 35 minutes of Clique, and then 10 minutes for everything else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They would have had their own brand. It would have been like,
it would have been like what Bischoff wanted to do with the NWO.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's also this one. What if Hogan versus Flair was the WrestleMania 8 main event? It would have been...
I mean, it could have been, because that was originally supposed to be Hogan's last WrestleMania, because that's why they brought Warrior back at the end to take Hogan's top spot.
And Sid was supposed to take Hogan's spot,
yeah, there's
too.
a couple people supposed to take Hogan's spot. I mean, at that point, Flair was on his way out of WWE as well. I mean...
Yeah.
a dual participant leaves town match.
Yeah. Because Hogan was supposed to get out of there. Flair, you know what would have happened? I mean, Flair would have won. Here's what would happen. Flair would have won. Hogan's out of town.
Yeah.
Flair left.
No. Flair wouldn't have won. They would have had some wonk finish like they actually had at the end of that match.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And nobody would have won, and it would have ended with Hogan and the Warrior standing tall.
It would have helped nobody. They still would have done the rematch in WCW. Hogan still would have won.
Yeah, Hogan would have won that one.
Here's another one from the same person from Chesser. Says, what if Turner Broadcasting kept... What if the person who was in charge of TV at Turner after the merger was really into wrestling?
Yeah.
And they kept WCW on the air? That's one of those that's like too seismic to really think too hard about.
Really at that point, I don't know. WCW had a lot of work to rehabilitate their image.
Yeah.
You know, that brand had been run into the ground by...
They were bleeding money.
And they were bleeding money, just run into the ground with terrible creative for years.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And who knows if they'd stayed in business, how many wrestlers, once their contracts expired, are like, I'm calling Vince, I want out of here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, this is interesting. This is from... Can't see what the name is. What if WWF brought in DDP in a Who's the Reals People's Champ feud against The Rock instead of as the stalker of Undertaker's wife? DDP would still be buried, but it'd still be better than what we got. DDP was more or less the People's Champion of WCW.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea, by the way.
Yeah.
That's a really cool idea.
I mean, The Rock still would have beat him.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. It's better than what they did.
Yeah, I know. DDP, I legitimately, even back then watching, I thought it was really cool when DDP unmasked.
Yeah.
But I felt so bad for the guy because it was obvious for some weird reason Undertaker didn't like him, like for reals.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like he couldn't quite understand how to work within Vince's weird TV rules.
Well, I think he talked about was just like the basic fundamentals of how WWE constructs matches, like the feeding thing.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Like they didn't do that in WCW.
Yeah, right.
You know, and like if you get punched, you bump.
Yeah.
He talked about that, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, here we go. We'll end on this. Let's end on this one.
All right.
Big Red Celery says, what if WWE's WCW reboot would have actually worked in 2001? Maybe Vince could have brought in a bigger name than Buff Bagwell to face Booker T in the main event of that random Raw. How bad would WWF Monday Night Nitro would have been without names like Goldberg or Steiner being contractually available till late 2002? The main problem is I see it after reading that Nitro book was finding the right TV spot. Mm-hmm. This was 2001, so SmackDown was already on. Mm-hmm. So unless they rebranded SmackDown to like WCW, which I don't think was ever on the table, that was never an idea.
I'd be shocked if it was.
They were looking at like a Saturday night. I think from what I understand, they were looking at like Saturday night in the middle of the night for their WCW spot.
Which wouldn't have worked.
Which would never have worked.
No.
Unless they were to take their other spot, which I don't think that was even, if it was discussed, it wasn't like really
seriously. Yeah.
It wasn't seriously.
Yeah.
Like it just never seemed like they were serious. I did read, and I don't know how serious this was, but that Triple H wanted to make NXT originally bring back WCW for NXT.
Yeah.
And then I think it was like Regal or somebody was like, man, make it your own thing.
Yeah.
Make it something new.
Yeah.
So that could have been kind of maybe interesting. I mean, they have all the pay-per-view names they're using now. Yeah, I don't know. That could have been kind of interesting. Maybe it would have. I don't know what kind of if they would have tried to emulate the direction of WCW. Try to do the what's that venue that the Saturday Night used to run out of that NXT ran a couple times? Center Stage.
Center Stage Theater in Atlanta.
Yeah, Center Stage.
I thought you were going to talk about where they had the spring break episode.
Oh yeah, they could have gone to Sturgis and then
Panama City.
Yeah, they could have done that. They could still do that stuff.
They could.
Anyways, that's going to do it for this Wrestling What Ifs. Please drop your Wrestling What Ifs in the comments below so that we can talk about them in the next video. We like doing these things.
Yeah.
Anyways, what if we go get some lunch now? How about that?
You haven't eaten lunch yet?
No, man.
It's like 2 o'clock.
I know, I'm starving.
I had lunch already.